Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's episode. Um, I'm not sure how to begin this, but I want to bring the audience's attention to an observation of nature and its position in humanity's attention. If you look at the mind and you consider the mind to be an attention point, a point of attention, or this point, you can see it spherically as just what your sensory perception provides you with. This sort of spherically endless space of a world where phenomena exists in. To speak about the intersection of man and God's mind is to speak about conception prior to layout. It means to wonder about the world prior to its form. So if we are life forms, we're wondering about the life prior to the form, or in some sense how this form of life is in motion. It's not, scientists should not study just particles in space, in outer space. They should also study particles in inner space. And what that means is how thought moves in the mind of man to be man. I was inspired to give these talks out of wonder of trying to find the spotlight of the civilization's attention, uh, many things that have not been acknowledged or are being avoided. Pretty much, I wanted to see what the civilization's blind spots are. I came to see one of the main issues of our civilization. Doesn't matter if a person notices this or someone not of our uh, terrestrial setting. It's one of those situations when you kind of look at humanity and you see this mass hallucination. This mass hallucination is not bad. It's like we shouldn't get rid of the mass hallucination, but we should, in some sense, wonder about its efficient advancement. Because fundamentally, I asked myself one day, why am I awake? Why do I keep waking up in this game of change? Where elemental forces change, even subjective forces change. Of many scenarios. So that's the reverence, that's the power of the unknown when it enters your life. It suddenly renders all viewpoints sincere. You suddenly recognize the actual situation rather than the situation you were previously responding to. You see, the human being either is going to go towards a universal sense of identity, or it's going to try to resist. It's going to try to resist acknowledging itself as an expression of this universe. This resistance can appear and manifest in many ways. It could be that moment where man rebelled against God, or God rebelled against man. And of course, the notion of God rebelling against man is uncommon, but it is the notion of how the world influences the individual rather than the individual influencing how they perceive the world. You see, I consider it very simply that throughout the day, there's two things usually happen. Either you happen to the world or the world happens to you. Well, the first thing you recognize is that this world is so vast, and due to us being a biological extension of what is this planet's intelligence, it's like the planet was so intelligent, it came up with us. We are so intelligent, we came up with the notion of deeper dimensions and whatnot. So it seems like the purpose of matter, at least in 2019, can be said was to be a thought. That's why the material universe exists, so that we see beyond it. It's kind of like the person makes a ship, okay, and he sails with this ship for many for like, let's say, a long time. Eventually the ship gets to the destination. The person has to be able to let go of the reality of the vehicle, of the transportation, to reach the destination. When I looked at mystical traditions, when I looked at metaphysical notions of how life progresses even after its form, I came to realize that it's a sort of either there's something remains, and after the final curtain is pulled, we still see the performance of the cosmos continue, or we don't. If we don't see the continuity of the world, then it's very interesting, because what's not in your attention, you don't have to be responsible for. It's as if there was somebody who came to the civilization and said, hey, civilization of 8 billion people, you only have a lifetime to relate in the way that you are with what's going on here. It's very common sense that we can say if the physical existence is not apparent, like suddenly the elemental forces are not kept in the same point by the free will, that's pretty much death. Okay, it's kind of like it's a transportation of attention, but the transport is not the attention. But we believe it is in the mainstream. That's like you got to always see what the majority is paying attention to, because that's the idea that's been sold the most. So when I when I was looking at what people are doing in some sense in civilization, I recognize it is. Uh, I just looked at it. I looked at our greatest intellectuals, and I'm like, why are these people alive? You know, I don't mean I don't mean it in a chaotic way. I was just like, what are they living for? What is their vision? What is their purpose? How do they see the world? In that sense, I meant. And so when I looked at the intellectual mind, I saw it was the will to explore, and during exploration, what is the most valuable? The finding you bring back to the tribe. So what that means is, due to a sort of egoic construct pervading many individual creatures on this planet, individual human beings, many people have this mentality that they like. Think of it this way: it doesn't matter man, woman, or whatever. It's just embedded in the nature of our perception. We are hunter gatherers, and eventually, when we developed as tribes, whatever we found, it didn't matter if we gathered a new berry that nobody had discovered, or we hunted an animal that nobody had ever saw, and we brought it back to the tribe. Just the exposure of the updating of the same system had a value. This is kind of found in our evolutionary urge. I saw it was very hilarious. I saw this debate where this neurologist was in some sense denying the supernatural or the abstract, because there's nothing more supernatural than getting a thought out of nowhere, you know. The butterfly flies into your awareness and flies out, reminding you that beauty is not meant to be caged, that the greater rhythms of intelligence on this planet, the greater evolutionary modes of the system of humanity, the civilization we're living in, it has to require like 30% voluntary efficiency and advancement, and 70% nature just decides everything. Think of it this way: we're all the children of nature, and nature is like the parent. And nature chooses how this child, in some sense, how much freedom it has. You know, the parent doesn't let the child drive the car. The child that can't maintain that level of responsibility. So the child has to sit in the passenger seat, you know, in the back, you know, safely, and the parent drives. So when we look at the intelligence of the individual free will as if nature is giving us a helping hand, you don't think about your heart, it beats. You don't think about your lungs, they breathe. So you see, it's a notion of natural realizations in unnatural systems. And so the intersection of man and God's mind is the consideration of the cause point of existence. And it's very funny. If you notice, if you can't exist, you can't experience something. If you can't experience something, you don't exist. Do you see? That means consciousness and matter are simultaneous. Many philosophers have wondered about this display of our intelligence known as consciousness. What is this? How is there somebody just, how is their attention alive? Okay? Now, we have tried to give a response to that through time. through linear notions. So what happened is we asked such a deep question that the question made us want to turn this universe into a room. And so some of the earliest scientists did this. They contained the universe. So think of it this way: during the time of the Crusades, or even the Inquisition, or the religious kind of authorities back in the day, even Galileo, Copernicus, or here, let me say it like this: Laplace gave a model of the universe to Napoleon, the scientist, and Napoleon looked at this model of how the universe is, pretty much this explanation of a room, of this room that is this cosmos. And Napoleon looked at Laplace and he says, I don't see any idea of God in here. And Laplace looked at Napoleon and he said, my emperor works fine without it. You know, like Laplace was super chill, you know. Honestly, I cannot tell you. A mind free of any sort of program has more style. You can see the stylish people on this planet, they have a sort of freedom that the collective tribe kind of appreciates, you know? So for me, it's trust me, we are creatures that, whether we like it or not, subconsciously are seeking some sort of evolutionary advancement. This has made our psychologies in a way where we wonder the value of phenomena. When we wonder the value of phenomena, pretty much the species becomes tormented the moment they all think they're unique individuals. The species become tormented with what is the unique value. So the person this child, its eyes is opened, and it's receiving waves of data are hitting it. The first waves of data, for example, I'll use myself as an example, were for me the ideas of religion. Religious ideas hit me first. They entered my awareness first. But they did not change what nature was. So what I'm trying to tell you is that my whole life, I felt this world was a simulation of my own way of considerations of it. I didn't realize, like, it wasn't that I suddenly realized I was wrong. It was that the texture of the values that I was keeping in my moment shifted because an experience occurred where the experiencer no longer had to be limited to the conditions of the objects of experience. Right now, it's very interesting. If I ask you, who are you? You have only a conditional landscape to define yourself out of. It's so fascinating how it's like they said, it's very hilarious. They said invisible strings are maintaining everybody. Like there was a Chinese proverb like that, where pretty much their notion of destiny was this ultimate interconnectivity of nature's processes. The most important thing is that here I'll give that is to, in some sense, it passes butter. In order to pass the butter, the robot gains consciousness and looks at Rick and says, "What is my purpose?" This robot, and the Rick just looks at him and is like, "You pass butter." So the robot goes and passes the butter, then comes back to Rick. As he passes the butter back to Rick, then he says, "What is my purpose?" And then Rick says, "You pass butter." And then the robot goes, "Oh my God!" Like gets so disappointed and hopeless. And then Rick says, "Welcome to the club." That's what Rick says. That means that was a very unique. I don't know how many listeners caught that, but it was like an implication that we are in a fixed condition of elemental forces without an awareness of what we are. So you see, free will is divinity. The fact that there's free will in a programmed system, the fact that there are choices and decisions and options, that is where your free will arises. If you had no options, you couldn't say you have a free will. It's like you're on a roller coaster. What do you want? You can't redesign the roller coaster. You just go with the system, how the system's designed. When we recognize that the individual enters a setting where there's many people, what does that imply? And I'll tell you something very interesting. It implies responsibility for creative vision. Right now, as far as I can say, at most people become responsible for their own creative vision. For now, it's very hard for people to step out of their own stories of life and to begin appreciating other stories, you know. It's very important to recognize that, just like how you care for another human being not getting hurt, because why should they, like that mentality also gives you this kind of notion that when you care for a physical phenomena, you're also caring for all the kind of subjective considerations of that being. That means the notion of human rights was an evolutionary leap, because guys, we think evolution is just an objective transition. It is not. Seldom it is said, but sometimes subjects move objects. Not only objects move subjects. If you look at it as objects moving subjects, there's no such thing as free will. If you see it as subjects moving objects, then there is free will. Because this subject mysteriously is moving the object, we find there to be the presence of the unknown. So the scientist looks at a certain evidence of the world, and it can measure it, it can put it in a formula, it can test it, it can do many things, but there's some things that are moving in such unknown ways that we have to have the humility of the ant under the pebble, who can't figure out why the human being is going to work. The ant in the pebble under the pebble is designed for a different kind of engagement with reality. So the first thing we recognize is that the compassion of the higher beings is to allow creatures of design to follow their design. The human design is very unique because it is a biological extension of awareness. You see, people are either seeing themselves as the cause of reality, and they're seeing themselves as the effect of reality. The more you go to closer towards physical explanations of existence, that it means it was all like, if you just think existence is a physical game, it's, how can I tell you, your most fascinating destination is infinity. You're gonna just be entertained by infinite continuity. What else can an objective evolutionary animal do? For me, Charles Darwin's evolution was another way of saying the eternal effort of a temporary creature to continue, but it's an eternal effort. That means the mind rejected the temporary. The body could not yet. We have not created technologies that preserve our bodies more than our lifespan of 100 years. It's very rare when we see a human being continue. But the reason is, it's very, at the same time, it's like we are that conscious part of nature which is wondering to what extent does it change the world to its will. That means when you are taking from the dishwasher the the spoons and the forks to put them back in the cupboard or whatever, you know, in the drawer. So when you're doing that, you are choosing to consciously move phenomena. You are happening to the world. Your intelligence is choosing to fearlessly engage with taking the spoons and forks out of the dishwasher and put them in the drawer. That's a level of courage, guys, existential courage. So eventually I wondered about this, guys, because um, I remember reading the story. Uh, Let me tell you, responsibility first is held by the ego. So think of it this way: child is born. This waves of data hit the child. The child gets sculpted by the data. By the age of 14, establishes itself as an individual notion with a name and with a personality. So in some sense, the memory begins to activate in a unique pattern. Okay, so this pattern becomes the individualness of the child. So as the child begins experiencing life, it's no longer just a moment of sight before learning language or anything, just an experiential phenomena. It becomes a contained phenomena to itself and eventually to others. So first you got to recognize, you got to study how your intelligence is being a communication of your universal sector. You got to start having the humility of the unknown. You got to have an unknown humility towards knowledge, or you will get defined by the knowledge. So this is the thing that I'm saying, that there was once this man who he was sharing wise things. This is a Zen story. He was like this monk who suddenly had tapped into an incredible awareness, so he was sharing important things. Okay? Now suddenly the people of the town are like, yo, like they were still caught into the guru mentality. They were looking for a savior, the people of the town. So they looked at this guy and they're like, you have to be our guru, we'll all be your disciples. So it was that weird situation where people came to the guru and said, we'll be your disciple. The guru didn't do any sort of anything. And so the guru's like, okay, this is a synchronistic sign from life that I am ready. So the guru stands there and they give him the proper costume. The whole Halloween show goes on, you know. Suddenly, somebody out of the townspeople comes and asks a question from the sky that starts with the word why. Why is something like this? This person suddenly scopes in all the data that their awareness has provided them, and they realize they don't know. This guy who suddenly was decided by the people to be the wise, like the sage of the town. Okay, so this guy, and like as a Zen monk, like suddenly feels like a drop of cold sweat behind his like bald head. Okay, and he suddenly feels nervousness, tension, and he suddenly sees the unknown break his ego. Okay, this is what point of failure is. The point of failure is to allow you to reapproach the same situation with a different view. The previous view failed. Sometimes the lack of acknowledgement of your failure is why you don't succeed, because you're not recognizing, pinpointing the inefficiency that is continuing, you know? So anyways, this guy suddenly sees he doesn't know. And he suddenly like gets shocked internally and just looks at the people and he's like, I am no longer anybody's teacher. Do not talk. Like I'm leaving the town. The guy leaves the town. After 2 years, comes back with a different glow in his eyes, and then people have understood what. Then people understand what he's saying. So the notion of the story is one that the reason the wise man said patience is key, because in patience the world brews into maturity. Language can be used in two ways. It can be used internally and it can be used externally. Externally, you have to use it playfully and try to seek out efficient patterns of your civilization's advancement. Internally, you can be as serious you want. You can have any sort of personal belief. You see, this is what's happening. What I find what is funny are the forefathers of civilization's global values, which is a sort of universal freedom of speech and mind. So in some sense, the certain wise men looked at civilization and they're like, okay, in order for the person, for the citizen to truly function, the citizen has to be free. Okay, and so this doesn't mean just their time is free. It means their mind is free. Their mind is not chained to programs in which the free will cannot efficiently maneuver. Okay, that is our economy has chained us to a lack of time to explore our intelligence. That what I'm telling you is the economy cares about resources. It doesn't care about intelligence. Intelligence, if we really cared for it, we will value freedom. The freest people would become, in some sense, the most abundant. When I say free, this is free of ignorance. Every civilization gives the child a large amount of ignorance, whether you like it or not. It's pretty much how the mind of the child starts putting the world into a story, and the story is being defined by the experiences of the child. The child could have rough experiences, so the world has become a rough place and he will resent it. The person could have nice experiences and the world becomes a nice place, but suddenly it could be boring. So too much order makes you wonder where the chaos is. Too much chaos makes you wonder where the order is. Civilization kind of oscillates between this. That means there have been civilizations that woke up like the ancient Greeks, and as they walked the streets, they looked at the clouds, and some part of them considered that the gods were watching them from above the clouds. You know, they entertained the notion of the world that was very spiritual because the unknown was personalized. And what the secular society is doing is they are getting rid of any attempt to personalize the unknown. So they're leaving it as impersonalized data. They're pretty much trying to destroy a personal dimension of freedom. That is the issue. So the mind has to be free, but the mind has to abide by the system that it's working in. So what that means is like when I recognized when I saw a debate between a theist and an atheist on YouTube, you know what I noticed? I noticed if we took the valid points of all of them, as if the theist and the atheist, they were not two different minds debating, they were two sides of the same coin. They were two different people who had two different worldviews. Okay, that means the value of the world was kept differently in the eyes of each person. Meister Eckhart has a quote which will do great justice to the title of this episode. He says, "The same eyes that I see God are the same eyes God sees me." This is a very big statement. This means there is only one intelligent awareness here, and it has been segmented in so many ways. Let me tell you, human beings have two options. They either worship the known or they worship the unknown. The act of worship was the locking down of attention on one phenomena. It was concentration. So a person who worships God is concentrating on this idea of being everywhere, or being everywhere, literally being everywhere. When you look at the ancient Vedic culture, you recognize these beings lived in the world with an acknowledgement that there was an individual, there was the mind, the individual soul, and then there was the ever presence of the soul of the soul, the oversoul of the world. So they eventually saw the evolution of intelligence on this planet leading towards a non-conceptual, inconceivable union. So the word yoga means union, by the way. Not a lot of people know it. When you say yoga to people, they probably pretty much think stretching, I think. There's like, yeah, I've heard about yoga. I've seen, like, who was it? There was this awesome, like, there was this Facebook post where I literally was like laughing for like a couple minutes at it just alone, just when I saw it on my phone. And the post, the Facebook post was like the guy who made nylon yoga pants is like should be given a medal. So anyways, what I'm trying to say is that the word yoga means union. It means the union of a recognition of the inseparability of the individual activity with the cosmic activity. Your mind right now is containing things through ideas, through subjects. So you are an objective phenomena that is subjectively orchestrating itself. It subjectively orchestrates itself in two ways. One in its personal dimension, and then the impersonal dimension. The personal dimension is what you are actually seeing. The impersonal dimension is all that you're not seeing, but your sight is present in that impersonalness. So what that means is that when I'm talking to somebody, I stop just looking through my eyes. I pretty much stop having an opinion. Because if I have an opinion, I'm still in my own world listening to them. So my mind will endlessly try to tackle something that's not real to it, you know? But sometimes you got to get rid of the surge to see what you are actually looking for. A lot of my philosophical speculations and inquiries of the world have led me to a realization that we are, let's say for now, an ego-driven civilization. That means because we're using the technology of language, we have in some sense made ourselves into language. So your ego is named. Your name is your attention to your subjective self. Your subjective self is your ego. Okay, if you notice, your subjective self shifts based on every environment you will enter. When you're in the shower, your sense of subjective, your ego is different. So that's why you're so free and you start singing in the shower. Okay, there's a level of comfort. There's a level of subtler subconscious freedom activated. But you see, when you're not, for example, when you're in a place where you're nervous, suddenly the ego has been pointed out. That means a lot of people, their sense of freedom is because they feel nobody's watching. The purpose of individual activity is to attempt it. That means if your ego has you occupied by a certain program of behavior, it doesn't have to worry about you looking at it. What that means is, just like there's a force like gravity, there is a sort of force that has, the Rig Veda said it, that has, the mind is enslaved to the real. The mind is a slave to the real. What that means is there's a certain natural way that this field of intelligence is making human beings be shaped into thoughts. Pretty much our attention as a civilization is a decision of what continues into the future. That is the reason. That is the reason. Because if it's on some level, it's very easy to not care for the world. It's so easy because you're like, it's this changing thing, you know. It's like, what's the point? We're in the middle of nowhere in empty space. What's the point? Like it's very easy to interpret something, to see something to be meaningless. It's much harder to see meaning in something because the meaning has to have more considerations of points of data. Okay, but when you want to see something is meaningless, it's like you just don't care for the data. When you don't care for someone, it doesn't matter how they speak to you. You will not hear them. So if we can say God's mind is the laws of nature, and we say man's mind is the effect of these laws of nature, so we can say the intersecting point between the laws of nature and how man's mind move are in some sense the space. Okay, that means man is not God and God is not man in a theological way of consideration. That means the theologist believes that he is not in heaven yet. That's why he can still go to heaven. You see, the fact that we have not made heaven an instant care for the world, rather than a care for what will happen after the world, it's as if, like, imagine somebody who's gone into a movie theater, and instead of watching this magnificent movie, they're wondering what they're going to do after the movie. Do you see? It's like during the movie of this lifetime, they're wondering what's going to happen after the movie. When the movie ends, am I going to go to heaven or hell? Like, you know what it is? It's like, pay attention to what's going on because your eyes are made to be here. The world is made to be seen. So it was a spiritual notion. It's pretty much like the yin and the yang, but the yin and the yang is how there's a subjective way you're alive, where your objectivity is like the small dot in like okay, so the yin yang symbol, let me say it in case people don't know what it is. I think everybody knows. But the yin yang symbol is a circle that's divided with a sort of S in the middle, and it has two dots, and it's one side of it is black with a white dot, and the other side is white with a black dot, and it's all in one circle. So the notion is of the yin yang symbol that in one moment of being there is a chaotic aspect of your intelligence with a bit of order maintaining it, and there's a bit of ordered intelligence. There's a ordered universe with a bit of chaos in it. So that means that if we can consider that it's like the same way we see the relationship of the yin yang symbol is the same way you can see the various hemispheres of the brain. Okay, so think of it this way. Um, Now, I don't know how accurately I could speak about this in regards to a neurological setting, but like in a neuroscientific way, but I could say it like this, that the frontal lobe seems to be where the active intelligence is occurring, and the frontal lobe is kind of like the intersection of the division, if the brain was like between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. As far as I've read so far, You know, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I'm saying that it seems that the left hemisphere of the brain has to do with the coordination of the right side of the body, and the right hemisphere of the brain has to do with the coordination of the left side of the body. So we recognize that it's very interesting. If you notice, you're not just a biological creature, you are a symmetrical biological creature. Okay, that means if you drew a line, like if you were standing in the middle of a portal, and your right side of, like, you know, like the portal divided was like, how can I say it, imagine like entering a portal sideways, you know. There will come a moment where one of your eyes is in one world and the other eye is in another world. Okay, so you'd kind of become one moment in two worlds. So I'm saying similarly, we have one brain that has two hemispheres. Now, the yin yang symbol applies that if one, we say there's the creative side and the analytical side. So imagine the yin yang relationship due to the existence of the frontal lobe is kind of like uh, a part of your intelligence is functioning as chaos first and then order appearing, and a part of your intelligence is occurring as order first and then chaos appearing. Okay, so what I'm trying to tell you is that man is not good or evil. Okay, man is not good and bad. Our morality is unupdated. We're functioning with morality 1.0, but we should be at morality 11.0 as a civilization, right? So our notions of morality have not updated, even though the actions of man have, of course. So it's as if like you suddenly have to recognize, imagine right now as you're sitting, let's do a very playful thought experiment. Right now, so imagine right now, um, let's say if I told you, imagine a canoe hovering in the air in your backyard, just moving between the trees. A canoe hovering. Your mind can imagine that, okay? Your mind can, by me saying the words, animate those symbols into your own way of seeing it, okay? So you can visualize things. Now I'm telling you, visualize right beside you, wherever you are right now. Imagine to your left side is your chaotic self, and to your right side is your ordered self, okay? Just imagine this. Imagine that the most chaotic version of you is standing right beside you, and the most ordered version of your mind is standing beside you. That means the failed self and the successful self. Just wonder. Right now, I'm telling you, this is a thought experiment. We're just playing with, our attention is playing with subtlety, with subtle abstraction. But I'm saying, just imagine your greatest self and your non-greatest self, the most chaotic sense of yourself and the most ordered sense of yourself, right here with you. So you will immediately realize you are in a room with the greatest potential and in the greatest efficiency and the greatest inefficiency. So I am telling you right now, you are a relationship in this world. Okay, whether you like it or not, your biological body has a relationship with the nature, the natural way this world exists. If you look at creativity, you will realize innovation and genius are rhythms. So it's as if when Leonardo da Vinci was writing with one hand and drawing with one hand at the same time, he was in some sense administering as if he was experiencing a dynamic rhythm of the chaotic aspect of intelligence and the ordered aspect of intelligence unifying. Okay? It's very important. Culture must be protected from non duality. Did you know that? This is why there will always be a part of man's mind which will prevent multidimensionality in a singular dimension. It's like these are urges, okay? We don't recognize it, but our societies should be designed as the brain. Imagine this, that the way we classified sectors of society, imagine a global society emerges in the next 10 years, okay? This global society will be the first attempt. It's as if we are not asking the old world to change, as if like this is Mr. Within's solution to a sort of updating of what's going on in this planet. Okay, so for me, it's too fragmented. That's the situation. Okay, so the world is divided up into nations, and it's not just the world. Even the psyche of man is divided into separate values. So, for example, the conscious, subconscious, unconscious mind. So everything has been divided. So you cannot ask a world that has been living in a certain way to suddenly change. I recognize this to be inevitable and impossible and inefficient. So I thought, how can we bring a kind of better world without getting rid of the old world, because the old world cannot change. Our ancestors cannot change. You just go to people in generations older than you and you realize their viewpoints cannot change. So the solution is we add a new dimension, which can translate into more simpler words. We tell a new story. We start functioning with a new story, with new values in civilization, rather than constantly trying to make better the old stories that weren't efficient. So in some sense, a part of reality has to attempt to utilize the space of novelty. We have to recognize that the new can be more efficient than what has already been seen. So think of it this way: we should create a world, or we should at least aim to leave behind a world that, if geniuses are born in the future, they can like, how would I say it? As if, like, I'm thinking like 8 billion people and growing, human beings on this planet. They will eventually come to realize life is like we're all using the same parking lot, but in different moments of history, our existence comes and parks into it, being a part of history. It's anyways, it's a very profound notion. I wrote something, guys, yesterday. Yesterday I was downtown Toronto and I found a pleasant moment where I could just observe the world and write something. And I remember I observed something chaotic. So I'm not saying that when I wrote this thing I'm reading for you, there was a sort of intensity there in my mind as well, as if like I was. Anyways, I'll read it for you. This is what I wrote yesterday. I say, how can I not be mad when my species is occupied with costume games and idea worship? People sit throughout the day just trying to follow their routines properly, without ever wondering if there's truly more to care about than their obsessions with self. How shall freedom roar? I can't read my own handwriting. How shall freedom roar in modern times? What shall we do with the wiped off tears of our ancestors, whose eyes tremble when humanity is slowly being pushed into an empty mechanical box? When a story can hide the ever-changing nature of reality from the person, and I shall not let my species... Jesus Christ, I gotta work on my handwriting. And I shall not let my species' fears occupy the stages, occupy the stage that commands for mankind's efficient vision. Why see death in the creation of space? In other words, I am reconsidering how the world is moving. I thought 2019 we were very evolved. I felt the species was evolved. I thought we were at the peak of technology, of our technology as a civilization. But we are in some sense in a puzzle. We are in a puzzle that it's just like the Rubik's Cube. The creature is attempting for an incredible vision, yet begins to see that attempts at it lead a part of it inefficient. So the most efficient thing we can do with inefficiency is use it. Do you see? It's kind of like Aikido. Like the dude's walking, somebody attacks, the Aikido master is like, okay, time to apply these techniques. You know? And so the hooligan runs at the Aikido master, and the Aikido master just uses the momentum of the hooligan to just push him down. As if when someone's charging at you, the easiest way to fight is to trip them. That's Aikido for you, you know? So it's utilizing the forces that approach you throughout the day. So that means when you fail, is that feedback for you, or do you just get sad and think about life and change your attempt? Humanity is on a brink of an inner extinction because the self has been idolized to a level where it has made itself superior. So I want you to imagine right now, externally, not everybody is rich, but because the economy influences us all, we all want some sort of comfort of wealth, okay? Due to this mentality, this means people in their minds are trying to be kings and queens. They're trying. They're trying to be the highest way they can, in some sense, express the individual. We worship the individual, especially Western civilization. You know, in Eastern civilizations, they worship God. You know, but it's still like attention games. You know, it doesn't matter where you are. You got to step out of language. You got to get out of the language threshold, and then you'll see the world. And then when you see the world, you see its sensitivity. So there arises a sort of existential sensitivity to how your experience is maintaining that existence. Now there's going to be counter questions to this. That means any grand movement is beautiful because it sets into motion a counterculture game. Okay? That means the moment human beings were evil, suddenly the good could do something about it. The moment the good were like at their peak, suddenly the evil was like, no, you know? And so there was this constant competition between forces of nature in man's mind. Think of it this way, it's like your sensory perception, the data of the world is fighting how it gets to you. One thing I was very concerned about, because the notion of a soul has, I've been entertaining that notion for a while. I've been observing it. And the best thing you can say about the soul, which I wondered about this and I looked at it and I realized the answers. You know, I remember I asked an Islamic uh, friend about what Islam says about the soul. And it's as if somebody went and asked the Prophet, and I don't know if this is in a hadith or if this is a line in the Holy Quran, but it is, in some sense, the answer was that it's as if in a hadith, okay, so in the Quran it says the soul, or the Prophet seemed to say, the soul is a mystery of God. But there's a hadith that says when somebody asked about the nature of the soul, the Prophet told them it's like military ranks, it's like stations, it's like it has to do with sensitivity to what is here. Okay? So, in some sense, we can say the mysteries of the soul inevitably lead people to a hierarchical, abstract way of conceiving the beyond. So the soul becomes the relationship the unknown has with your knowledge, rather than the relationship your knowledge has with the unknown. If you just look through the narrow straw of the relationship of your knowledge with the unknown, and you want evidence too, it's like a tiny peephole, and somebody is looking through something, you know, this tiny crack in the wall, and they think what they see is everything, and they're just concluding it. It's as if there's a narrowness, there's a limitation. Knowledge comes with a sacrifice of every way, every other way you could have known that phenomena. Okay, so it's we're building something here, but we're building heaven in man's mind prior to his body finds any notion of a paradise, whether technological or natural. There's a sort of naturalness you got to maintain with who you are. If you don't maintain this, your desires can change your character very quickly. That means you become a person who can get angry quick because you have found there's an impatience of you to truly process data in this life. When I see two angry people fight, when I see violence, you know what I see? I see inefficient processing ability of data from both sides, or even from one side. Because the issue is uh, greed for reality to be a certain way. That's why wars begin. Pretty much, this is why if human beings are led rather than by principles as pillars of values for civilization, but they're led by people. Well, guess what? People's minds aren't is not cannot be balanced forever. You see, even the greatest king will have a bad day. Oh man. So, guys, I've been talking a while now. By the way, I appreciate any sort of engagement with these ideas from the audience. There's two people watching, so don't be shy. These live streams happen once. Okay, so there are these two ideas which are pretty much the same moment. There's this idea I want to speak about, which is very important. Based on the title I've written, I have to share this notion. So I'm speaking about. I want to take the audience's attention to a moment prior to any sort of subjective or objective attribute occurring in the experience of the being. Okay, so what that means is the intersection of man and God's mind must be a moment which is valid for both realms, for both realities. That means I am like as if it's an acknowledgement, as if of how God moves in man's mind and how man moves in God's mind. Okay, so again, when I'm using the word God, don't think of a character in a story. Think as if the forces of the nature, how the laws of the universe are occurring, okay, in ways that not we can't always interpret. So in some sense, how God moves in man's mind is how the world happens to the individual. How man moves in God's mind is how the individual happens to the world. How the individual happens to the world, this is where your imagination arises and where your free will lives. Your free will occurs to the world, and that's why it requires existence. This is why depression and stress arise any moment the person was at a dynamic state of identification with the world, and suddenly the dynamism of it has calmed down. So I see this, for example, in my grandfather, who was this like, powerhouse of like this working, like he was a factory owner in Iran, and he had a big business, and he was working every day of his life, kind of thing. Like life was work to him, and he in some sense, how would I say it? Like his free will identified with its intensity of application in the moment, and once that intensity changed, his identity changed. Is as if he was a businessman who didn't have time to think about God in some sense. But then, the moment his business was gone, the same intensity went elsewhere because the mind is very unique. It can be in states regardless of the body's change. So most people think their mind, or because it's from the brain, they think their intelligence is conditional to how the world is designed. Yet they don't realize the ability that our intelligence has had to spark a subjective evolution. We became the conscious part of nature, something many animals uh, do not comprehend in the sophistication of our species. In some sense, when I looked at a slaughterhouse, I'm like, if we looked at the morality of animals when they looked at human beings, they would think human beings are an alien nightmare. That's what tribal societies think. Those Amazonian tribes that haven't been explored by anthropologists, once the world is shown to them, chaos ensues. So pretty much the world is analyzed in ways where how the world moves for yourself, how the self moves for the world. I feel the true efficient value system of the human being is found through a collective effort for efficient vision. These two words should be these are this is like a pillar of civilization. I have this notion in some other talks I've spoken about, but it's mainly this body of work that I'm writing, and it's called the pillars of civilization, and it's my kind of resolution to how civilization should maintain itself, stretching from now to 10,000 years ahead. Okay, I feel in the next 10,000 years, there's going to be an ability to maintain continuity. Either the objective existential survival is going to come into an end. That means your mind is going to trap itself in a simulation because it's trying to attempt immortality objectively. So objectively, the simulation begins to have value. So we become kind of trapped in virtual simulations that infinitely go on. So we become an exploration of an illusion. So we become either an infinite exploration of an illusion or we become the infinite exploration of a truth. Now, the pillars of civilization are these pillars that every person who's born can contribute to, and it's in some sense self-awareness that builds these pillars. And these pillars, imagine like there was this giant column, and this giant column was going above the clouds. It was like this pillar just with going endlessly stretching into the sky. And every generation, every thinker that would wake up to the world and come and contribute to that pillar of civilization would in some sense would advance it. And these pillars of civilization are values that I've seen. You know how they say history repeats itself? That's another way of saying that there are patterns in history. And when you study those patterns, you begin to kind of notice values that our ancestors preserved, and these because they preserved it, it's kind of in our memory, in the memory of our DNA. Okay, it's as if like the thoughts of your ancestors move the DNA of your ancestors. Eventually, all stories of the world will snap out into a present moment. This present moment is very blissful because it's a recognition that consciousness is existing. Because consciousness is existing, that means, and there comes with it this kind of, mode of free will. You are free, and then your attention shapes the world, designs the world. So when you acknowledge your intelligence, not as somebody who's functioning based on a story of value, but as a designer. So in some sense, it's like Jordan Peterson, when he spoke to Sam Harris, in some sense gave a challenge to the secular society. Okay, and that challenge was to find a narrative of morality, to build one. As if scientists don't need to just build like particle accelerators, they also need to build a vision of their effort in which morality aligns with the efficiency of the civilization rather than the inefficiency of civilization. Because it's not that you should only have rational or irrational beliefs. It doesn't matter. The most rational beliefs of one moment in history in a couple hundred years can be seen by other historians as an irrational decision. Okay, maybe the greatest dictators and tyrants we see on this planet, they had a great, they thought they had the most rational answer to the solution of the world. And suddenly, years later, we saw that their effects led to the most incredible irrationality. So we cannot choose how the future decides how to preserve life. Okay, so this is why enjoy what is alive, because it's a rare moment in history you're existing in. We are existing in a moment where the mind that has governed knowledge is suddenly rediscovering, returning to nature, rediscovering the unknown. That's where the greatest explorations will arise. I feel we are not 8 billion just bodies, overpopulated bodies on this planet. We are 8 billion visions, intelligent visions of the world. There's something we can share, we can contribute. Language was that ability. The invention of the technology of language allowed consciousness for the first time, the inner realities of people could be communicated. Do you know there was a point our ancestry didn't have language? We just grunt or make noise like ooh, ah. Like caveman style of communication, but eventually it became sophisticated. It became sophisticated, and this is why many people say the most point of education is to, at least academic education, is to give the person an ability to read, write, and speak. So you start from just observing data. Then you begin processing the data. You begin having an ability to express vision. As you cultivate the ability to express vision, eventually you come to a point where you take suddenly you become responsible for your whole moment of being, and then your intelligence in every moment of your life fully activates. Trust me, it's because we're thinking we're characters in a story, our responsibility level is dictated by how the character thinks it is. But how the character thinks it is a limited comparison of data to the vastness of the intelligence of the world. So this is why there requires a patience and to allow your intelligence to kind of brew into a right answer. So when I was younger, things would happen and I would react. I would just say, but like I would not process the data. I would not think about it, and it was because there was a sort of fear. The issue with fear is that it makes you lose balance. This is why when you see this, there has been honorable warriors and there's been dishonorable warriors, and both have had success rates. The dishonorable warrior did not honor the true path, so used deceptive methods as in its fighting. The great honorable warrior was just stronger in maintaining honor. Like the guy didn't have to deceive because he knew he was stronger. Like there were different mentalities, different modes. The first thing I would, if I like I think is required is that we have to start creating giant statues on this planet. We have to start. Architecture has to stop building meaningless. We have to open the mind uh, of a better world. And the intersection of man and God's mind is the recognition of the whole condition, whole creation, creator phenomena kind of coming to a resolution of an instantaneous recognition of cause and effect. That means if we say consciousness is the cause and matter is the effect, or we say matter is the cause and consciousness is the effect, that game ends. We just see the world that we have been avoiding in front of our eyes and also behind our eyes. And then comes the great return to nature. In other talks, I will speak about this very important thing I'm writing is I consider to be one of my, like a sort of magnum opus to a version of myself. Um, it is an evolutionary return to nature. This book is very important because I'm starting to see how we have been terrified of nature, and because of that fear and terror of our temporal nature, we have made conclusions too soon, and the explorations have been inhibited. For me, just like in, I believe, like our educational system should function like the Survey Corps in that show called Attack on Titan. There should be an exploring unit beyond the walls of knowledge. Anyways, I hope this talk has served you guys. Much blessings and all.